There's a particular kind of person who would never describe themselves as anxious. They hold down demanding jobs. They make decisions quickly. They seem, by every outward measure, calm and capable. And then a partner takes 4 hours to reply to a text, and something happens inside them that has no relationship to how reasonable they are in every other part of their life. Their chest tightens. Their mind starts building theories, quietly at first, then more insistently. Did I say something wrong? Are they losing interest? Should I text again? Or would that seem desperate? They check the phone one more time, tell themselves they won't check it again, and then check it again 11 minutes later. If you ask this person whether they had an anxious attachment style, most would say no. Anxious sounds like a diagnosis, something visibly fragile, something that shows. But attachment anxiety rarely looks like what people expect. It doesn't announce itself as fear. Most of the time, it disguises itself as care, as intuition, as simply being a person who loves deeply. And that disguise is precisely why so many people carry this pattern for years without ever recognizing it for what it is. So today we're going to walk through what anxious attachment actually looks like in real, adult life. Not the textbook version, but the version that shows up in text message timing, in arguments, in friendships, in the particular flavor of relief that follows a partner finally responding. And we're going to ask a harder question underneath all of it. Why does a nervous system learn to treat love as something that has to be monitored, rather than something that can simply be trusted? This matters because attachment anxiety tends to go unrecognized for years, sometimes decades, precisely because it doesn't look like what people expect anxiety to look like. There's no visible trembling, no obvious panic. Instead, there's a kind of quiet, constant background monitoring, so normalized to the person experiencing it that they've never had a reason to question it. It simply feels like how relationships work, how love feels, how a caring person naturally behaves. Recognizing it as a pattern, rather than as an accurate reflection of reality, is often the single hardest and most important step in the entire process. To understand where this comes from, it helps to start with the original research. Psychologist Mary Ainsworth, building on John Bowlby's earlier work, ran a series of studies in the 1970s called the strange situation. Infants were briefly separated from their caregiver in an unfamiliar room, then reunited, and researchers observed exactly how the child responded. Some children were upset by the separation, but calmed quickly once reunited, comfortable using the caregiver as what Ainsworth called a secure base. Others showed a different pattern. They were intensely distressed during the separation, and when the caregiver returned, they didn't calm easily. They clung, and at the same time seemed almost angry, pushing away the very comfort they were desperate for. Ainsworth called this the anxious, or anxious ambivalent, attachment style. This isn't a personality quirk a child is simply born with. It tends to develop in response to a specific kind of caregiving environment, one that is loving but inconsistent. Not neglectful in any obvious way, not abusive, simply unpredictable. A parent who is warm and attentive some days and distracted or overwhelmed on others. The child never quite knows, from moment to moment, whether comfort will be available, and that uncertainty, repeated enough times, teaches the child's nervous system a lesson that has nothing to do with logic. Closeness cannot be relied upon, so it must be watched for constantly. That lesson doesn't stay in childhood. It becomes the operating system underneath adult relationships, dressed in different clothes. The first sign, and one of the most common, is what researchers sometimes call protest behavior. This is the urge to escalate contact the moment a partner seems distant, even briefly. A delayed reply gets followed by a second message. A quiet evening gets interpreted as a signal something is wrong. This isn't simply wanting connection, which is healthy and human. It's a specific kind of urgency, a sense that if you don't act now, the distance will become permanent. People with this pattern often describe knowing rationally, that their partner is probably just busy, while feeling something entirely different in their body, a low-grade alarm that doesn't listen to reason. The second sign is a tendency to interpret neutral behavior as a rejection. A partner who seems a little tired after work gets quietly reviewed for what it might mean about the relationship. A short reply gets reread several times, searching for a tone that may or may not be there. This isn't paranoia in the clinical sense. It's closer to a smoke detector that's been calibrated too sensitively, one that goes off at burnt toast as readily as it would at an actual fire, because somewhere along the way it learned that missing a real fire was more dangerous than a few false alarms. The third sign is something researchers call hyperactivation of the attachment system, which in plain language means an inability to simply let a worry sit unresolved. Securely attached people can feel uncertain about something in a relationship and still go about their day, trusting that the issue will get addressed eventually. Anxiously attached people often feel almost physically unable to do this. The uncertainty has to be resolved immediately through a text, a conversation, a direct question, even when waiting would probably serve the relationship better. This is why anxious attachment so often gets mistaken for being overly communicative or even confrontational, when what's actually happening is an inability to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing. A fourth sign, and one that surprises people, is a pattern of giving disproportionately in relationships, doing more of the emotional labor, remembering more details, initiating more contact, apologizing first even in disagreements that weren't entirely your fault. This often gets framed by the person doing it and by everyone around them as simply being a generous, thoughtful partner. And it can be that. But underneath it, there is sometimes a quieter belief operating. If I am helpful enough, attentive enough, easy enough to be with, I will be less likely to be left. The generosity is real, but it's carrying weight it was never meant to carry, functioning partly as insurance against abandonment rather than simply as an expression of care. A fifth sign shows up in how conflict gets handled, specifically a disproportionate fear of a partner's anger or distance following an argument. Many anxiously attached people describe a specific dread that follows any disagreement, not about being wrong, but about what the disagreement might mean for the relationship's survival. This can lead to over-apologizing, agreeing to things you don't actually agree with, or working overtime to repair the emotional temperature of a conversation before it's even fully finished, because an unresolved tension feels, physically, like danger. A sixth sign is what's sometimes called earning behavior in friendships and work relationships, not just romance. This might look like feeling especially anxious after a friend cancels plans, wondering if you did something to cause it, or feeling a disproportionate need for a boss's approval, tracking every interaction for signs of whether you're still in good standing. Attachment patterns don't stay confined to romantic relationships. They tend to show up anywhere closeness or approval is involved, which is part of why this pattern is often misdiagnosed, even by the person experiencing it, as simply being a people pleaser, rather than recognized as attachment anxiety operating across every relationship in someone's life. A seventh sign is a specific kind of memory bias. Anxiously attached people often recall the emotionally intense moments of a relationship with far more clarity and weight than the calm, ordinary ones. A single argument or a single night of distance can dominate someone's overall sense of how a relationship is going, even if it was surrounded by weeks of steady closeness. This isn't dishonesty. It's simply how a nervous system tuned to threat allocates its attention, weighting danger signals far more heavily than safety signals, because historically, missing a danger signal was costlier than missing a moment of calm. An eighth sign, often the hardest to recognize because it looks like the opposite of anxiety, is a kind of testing behavior, pulling away slightly to see whether a partner will notice and pursue. This can look like taking longer than usual to reply, mentioning other people who have shown interest, or creating small moments of distance, not out of genuine disinterest, but as an unconscious way of checking whether the other person's affection is dependable. If the partner does pursue, it provides temporary relief. If they don't, it often gets read as confirmation of an underlying fear that the connection was never as solid as it seemed, even when the partner may simply not have registered the distance as significant at all. A ninth sign is difficulty enjoying good moments in a relationship without a background hum of bracing for them to end. Someone might be having a genuinely wonderful evening with a partner and simultaneously be aware of a small, persistent thought. This is nice, but it won't last, or I should enjoy this because something will probably go wrong soon. This isn't pessimism as a general worldview. It's specific to closeness, a learned expectation that good connection is temporary by nature because in the original environment where this pattern formed, it usually was. A 10th sign, and perhaps the most quietly exhausting one, is a persistent sense of being too much. Many anxiously attached people carry a private belief that their needs, their desire for reassurance, their wish for consistency, are somehow excessive, a burden they have to apologize for or minimize. This belief often coexists uncomfortably with the behaviors we've already described, so someone might send a second text checking in and then immediately feel embarrassed about having sent it, caught between the urge for reassurance and the fear that wanting reassurance at all makes them difficult to love. An 11th sign is a strong reaction to a partner's independence, specifically their enjoyment of time, friendships, or activities that don't involve you. This is different from ordinary jealousy. It's a subtler discomfort that arises when a partner seems fully content on their own, going out with friends without checking in, absorbed in a hobby, simply at ease in a way that doesn't reference the relationship at all. For someone with attachment anxiety, this contentment can register, quietly and often without full awareness, as a small threat, as though a partner's happiness that doesn't involve you is evidence that they might need you less than you need them. A 12th sign is a pattern of choosing partners who are, in some way, slightly out of reach, whether through busy schedules, emotional guardedness, distance, or ambiguous relationship status, and then experiencing this unavailability as a kind of proof that the connection is valuable. This isn't accidental. A nervous system that learned love as something to be won rather than received will often, without any conscious decision, gravitate toward exactly the kind of partner who keeps that old, familiar effort necessary. Recognizing this pattern retroactively, looking back at a string of relationships and noticing a common thread of chasing rather than simply receiving is often one of the more sobering realizations anxious attachments eventually produce. Consider a brief, composite example. Someone we'll call Priya describes herself as an easygoing, low-maintenance partner, someone who rarely asks for much. And yet she notices that after almost every date, she replays the conversation in detail, searching for signs of how it went, checking her phone with unusual frequency for the rest of the evening, and feeling a disproportionate wave of relief when a message finally arrives. She would never describe herself as anxious. She simply believes she cares more than most people do. It's only after learning about attachment patterns that she recognizes the gap between how calm she appears and how much internal monitoring is actually happening underneath that calm exterior, monitoring that has been running quietly and exhaustingly for most of her adult life. Attachment anxiety isn't a personality defect, and it isn't a sign of being needy in some inherent, permanent sense. It's a learned strategy, one that made complete sense in the environment where it was built. A nervous system that grew up in inconsistency learned, quite reasonably, that vigilance kept it safer than trust did. The strategy worked in its original context. It's simply now being applied in situations and often with people where it isn't needed anymore and where it can actually create the very distance it's trying to prevent. That last point deserves its own attention, because it's one of the more painful ironies of this pattern. The behaviors anxious attachment produces, The need for frequent reassurance, the sensitivity to small shifts in tone, the urge to resolve every uncertainty immediately can genuinely put strain on a relationship, sometimes even creating the exact distance the anxious partner feared in the first place. This isn't because the anxious partner is doing anything wrong on purpose. It's because a strategy built for surviving unpredictability doesn't always translate smoothly into a relationship that's actually safe, and it can occasionally read to a partner as pressure rather than as love, even when love is exactly what it is. It's also worth naming what anxious attachment is not, because the term gets used loosely in casual conversation. Wanting communication, consistency, and emotional availability from a partner is not attachment anxiety. Those are reasonable, healthy needs, and having them met is part of what a good relationship provides. Attachment anxiety specifically describes the intensity and automaticity of the fear response when those needs feel uncertain, the difference between wanting reassurance and feeling unable to function without it, between noticing a partner seems distant and being convinced, within minutes, that the relationship is ending. So, how does someone actually begin to recognize this pattern in their own life, especially given how well it disguises itself as normal caring behavior? One useful marker is proportion. It's worth asking, honestly, whether your emotional reaction to a given moment matches its actual size. A partner being 15 minutes late to respond to a text is, in almost every realistic scenario, a small event. If it produces a large, urgent emotional reaction, that gap between the size of a trigger and the size of the response is often the clearest signal available that something older is being activated, something that predates this particular relationship entirely. Another marker is what happens in your body before your mind has even formed a thought. Anxious attachment often announces itself physically before it announces itself mentally. A tightening in the chest, a sudden restlessness, an urge to check the phone that arrives faster than any conscious reasoning about why. Learning to notice that physical signal and treating it as information rather than as an instruction to act immediately is one of the more practical starting points for working with this pattern rather than being run by it. A third marker involves noticing your explanations after the fact. People with attachment anxiety often become skilled at justifying their behavior in ways that sound reasonable on the surface. I just wanted to check in. I just needed clarity. I'm just someone who communicates a lot. These explanations aren't dishonest, but they sometimes function as a kind of cover story, allowing the underlying urgency to go unexamined because the behavior it produces looks, from the outside, like ordinary communication. A fourth marker is worth mentioning specifically because it's easy to miss. The way this pattern often gets reinforced by people around you rather than challenged. Friends who hear the story of a delayed reply and immediately validate the worst-case interpretation. While that's definitely a bad sign, aren't being unkind, but they are, often unintentionally, feeding the exact mechanism that keeps attachment anxiety running. Learning to notice when you're seeking validation for a fear rather than perspective on a situation is a subtle but useful distinction, one that becomes easier to spot once you know to look for it. It's worth adding a note here about how this differs from person to person because attachment anxiety doesn't look identical in everyone who has it. Some people express it primarily through words, frequent check-ins, questions about where a relationship stands, direct requests for reassurance. Others express it almost entirely internally, appearing calm and low maintenance on the outside while running an exhausting internal monitoring process that a partner may never even know about. This second version is sometimes harder to recognize, both for the person experiencing it and for the people around them, precisely because it produces so little visible behavior, even though the internal experience can be just as consuming as the more outwardly expressed version. If this pattern sounds familiar, it's worth knowing that attachment styles are not fixed for life. Research on what's called earned secure attachment shows that people can and do shift from anxious patterns toward more secure ones over time, usually through a combination of self-awareness, corrective relationship experiences, and in many cases, therapeutic support that helps separate old fears from present reality. This shift tends to happen slowly and rarely in a straight line, but the nervous system that learned vigilance in one environment remains capable of learning trust in another, given enough consistent evidence that trust is warranted. Part of that evidence gathering involves something almost counterintuitive, deliberately practicing tolerance for uncertainty in small doses. This might mean noticing the urge to send a second message and waiting an extra hour before deciding whether it's still necessary. It might mean sitting with a moment of unresolved tension in a relationship without immediately trying to fix it, and observing that the relationship survives the pause. Each of these small experiences functions as new data for a nervous system that previously had very little evidence that closeness could withstand distance without breaking. Another part involves learning to separate a partner's actual behavior from the story your nervous system is quick to talk about that behavior. A partner being quiet after a long day at work is a fact. The interpretation that their quietness means something is wrong between you is a story, one that may or may not be accurate, and one that anxious attachment tends to generate automatically and with total conviction. Building a habit of asking, "Is this the fact?" or "Is this the story my nervous system usually tells?" creates a small but meaningful gap where a different, more accurate response becomes possible. It's also worth saying that partners of anxiously attached people play a real role here, not as a cause to fix, but as a source of the exact kind of consistent, predictable presence that can slowly recalibrate an anxious nervous system over time. This is part of why anxious attachment often shows real improvement inside relationships with securely attached partners, people whose responses are steady enough, over enough repetitions that the old rule, closeness disappears without warning, starts to lose its evidentiary support. None of this means the anxious partner is simply waiting to be rescued by the right person. The internal work, noticing the pattern, tolerating the discomfort of uncertainty, separating fact from story, has to happen regardless of who you're with, because attachment anxiety will find new material to worry about in any relationship, secure or not, until the underlying pattern itself is addressed rather than just the specific fears it happens to be attached to this week. It's also worth acknowledging that recognizing this pattern in yourself can bring up an uncomfortable mix of relief and grief at the same time. Relief, because behavior that once felt confusing or shameful, the overthinking, the second texts, the disproportionate reactions to small silences, suddenly make sense, has a name, has a history. Grief, because that history usually points back to an early environment where love genuinely was unpredictable, where a child had every reason to learn that closeness needed to be watched for constantly. That grief deserves space of its own, separate from the practical work of change, because understanding where a pattern came from and actually feeling the loss underneath it is two different processes, and skipping the second one in favor of jumping straight to fixing the first one often leaves the old wound quietly intact underneath the new coping strategies. Here's the insight worth carrying out of this video. Anxious attachment isn't proof that you love too much or that you're simply a passionate, all-in kind of person, though it often gets romanticized that way. It's a nervous system that learned, early and reasonably, that love had to be monitored to be kept. The behaviors that come from that lesson can look, from a distance, remarkably like devotion. But underneath the devotion is usually something quieter and more vulnerable. A person still checking, all these years later, to see if this time the love will actually stay.